I'm privileged to be able to host now with Andrew a panel that's going to focus on the business side of daily fantasy. And for this panel, we're going to bring back up one of our favorites, David Falk, who is, I might add, has his own sports management school named after him, the Falk Management School, up at Syracuse. So, all sorts of crossover this week and at this event. But David, you've been introduced already. Please come up again. And with David is a great friend of mine, someone that I've known for many years. He worked for me when he first came out of college, back in the day, as they say. He went on to great success. Started several companies in the technology space. Sports technology has been his focus and expertise over time. He became a senior executive at Yahoo, ran much of their sports content, and actually did more than that, but I'll let him tell a little about it. And today is the president of digital for the Chernin Group, which was started by Peter Chernin, longtime News Corp exec, who left the company some years ago and formed the Chernin Group. Mike is someone who is running their efforts in sports content, and again, I'll let him explain more detail around that. But we appreciate the two of you being here and Andrew, grab a mic, please. But we appreciate you being here to discuss the impact of fantasy sports, and for example, what an investor might think. There are a lot of high-profile ones that have been involved in and got involved in fantasy sports. What are they thinking today? How do they view the industry going forward, given the legal concerns and that we've heard about, regulatory concerns that we'll hear about a little later this morning, and from David Falk's perspective, how the players look at fantasy sports. How does a player look at the idea of, being, gambled on or bet on, or, how do they view? I think most players understand that, there's some pretty, firm lines between involvement or any kind of relationships between gamblers or gambling. But how do they feel about fantasy sports? David also speaks from the perspective of being a very savvy sports tech investor. So I think his perspective in this area will be helpful as well. But let's start with Mike Kerns, who came all the way from San Francisco to be here this morning. We thank you for that. Maybe a little about your background and how daily fantasy sports and tech have crossed your career.
Sure. It's great to be here. Good luck this weekend. I'll be rooting for Villanova because UCLA didn't even make the tournament this year. I'm a UCLA connection as well with Jeff and Ed. So I started my career working with a guy named Ron Conway, who's probably the most active early stage technology investor in the world. He runs a fund called SV Angel. Then went and worked with Jeff and Lee and David Cornwell in sports management. And then I started a company that was called ProTrade, which only exists on some obscure links on Google still, I'm sure. But essentially it was daily fantasy. It was we basically created a virtual stock market of athletes, portfolio of athletes that people would pick, and we would let people bet on the outcome of their portfolio's appreciation against their competitor, and then we would take a fee. This was about 4 years before FanDuel started. I remember when FanDuel started. ProTrade didn't make it for a variety of reasons. Thankfully, we had long-term investors who were supportive of us. We basically rebranded the company to be Citizen Sports, and we brought fantasy sports and commute sports data to Facebook when Facebook opened up their platform in 2007. And we were one of the largest application developers on Facebook. So if those of you who might remember Facebook back in 07, 08, 09, there were multi-million million-person March Madness bracket games. We used to have 5 million people playing March Madness brackets on Facebook through our apps. We had a multi-million-person fantasy football product that Yahoo ended up acquiring our business. We also had the mobile app called Sportacular, which was the biggest sports app on iOS and Android, significantly bigger than ESPN's ScoreCenter. Yahoo bought us in 2010. While at Yahoo, for the last 3 years, I reported to Marissa and ran our global media business and product, which included Yahoo Sports, which is the largest fantasy provider in the world. And we recently got into daily fantasy actually this year at Yahoo. I left Yahoo about a year ago, but was involved in the building of daily fantasy. We looked at acquiring FanDuel and DraftKings confidentially while at Yahoo, and didn't. And I can also say, you know, the Chernin Group is an investor in the daily fantasy company. I personally looked at those daily fantasy businesses outside of any official capacity. So I feel like, given I started a fantasy business, managed the Yahoo fantasy business, the Chernin Group's an active investor in digital media companies from SoundCloud to Twitter to Tumblr to Pandora, which are of the same vein of some respects of FanDuel and DraftKings as relates to technology-based unicorns, if you will. I certainly have a perspective, although we, the Chernin Group, and I am not personally an investor in FanDuel or DraftKings. So everything I say would be kind of from an investment perspective, but not necessarily directly related to those particular companies.
Great. David, what do players think about this?
Well, I can tell you what players should think about this. So since 1982 in the NBA, I don't know exactly what year it started in football, the players are in a fixed economic relationship with the owners where they share roughly 50-50 on the revenues. And it's been a long time since 1982. And so if the four of us were partners in a business and we each owned 25%, and we wanted to make more money, and Jeff wasn't willing to give up some of his 25%, Andrew wasn't willing to give up some of his 25%, I say, hey guys, how do we make more money? I think someone would tell me, God, David, this is really simple. We have to grow the business. So if you look at the amount of money involved in sports gambling, which is, you know, huge, billions, maybe bigger than the television contracts in the NBA, maybe not in the NFL, but certainly it would be the second largest revenue source. It is only a matter of time before the leagues figure out how to work with the local states' attorneys general's offices in each of the states and legalize the gambling. I was the guest editor of Worth Magazine in the March issue, which is a high net worth magazine. And without trying to be comical, I likened it to marijuana. You know, the amount of revenues flowing is so great. You know, either going to legalize it and make money taxing it, or you're going to like close your eyes and say, hey, it's not proper. So I think if you're a player, you want to embrace the revenue stream from gambling. And at the same time, obviously you need to have some protections from the leagues to ensure that it doesn't interfere with the integrity of the sport.
In many ways, David, well, I completely agree with you. In many ways, legalizing and regulating sports wagering would be a very strong enhancement towards preventing fixing, right? I mean, you have a lot of evidence of this in Europe, where Betfair, which is a real-time trading market of in-match betting, is the greatest determinant of fixing going on in tennis. In a very obscure tennis matches, third-rate level tours, fixes are being discovered based on irregular betting patterns and trading patterns on Betfair, right? A la analogous to an SEC in the New York Stock Exchange. It's beyond hypocritical. I mean, it was very interesting listening to the lawyers, and they have very, precise words and precise definitions of this and that. Someone needs to explain to me how it's legal to bet on a horse race down the road, but it's not legal to bet on the Sixers game down the road, but it is legal to bet on the Sixers game in Las Vegas. That makes no sense to me at all. but I'm not nearly as smart as everyone that was up here before.
Well, the other interesting thing, like I like to be a little bit of a student of sports history. So I think in April of 1989, Bart Giamatti suspended Pete Rose for gambling on baseball. Today, the NBA is a partner in FanDuel. And so, it's evolved, and I think it's a reality. I mean, as he explains way better than I could, gambling is part of our society. People gamble on sports all the time. You look at the tremendous interest over the last 10 years in bracketology. You have shows dedicated to handicapping. I was watching my alma mater play Virginia last week. They were down 16 at a certain point in time, and someone came on and said the odds are 1,000 to 1 that Syracuse is going to win the game, right in the middle of the game. And so in our society, it's a reality that it's here, it goes on, it has to be merged into the fabric of sports in a way that protects the integrity of the game. It will be an enormous resource for financially. And so if you're a player like LeBron and you have a maximum amount of money you could make under the collective bargaining agreement, and someone comes along and says, hey, wait a minute, LeBron, we're going to triple what you could make because we have an extra few $1 billion coming in from, a new partner. It's not Turner Sports, it's not ESPN or ABC, it's FanDuel and whatever. The players are going to embrace it.
If you take all of the money spent on all sports rights annually, which is, I think, the biggest contributor towards league income is sports rights. The amount of wagering in the United States, where it's illegal to wager on sports anywhere outside of Las Vegas, is 5 times bigger than all of the sports rights included. So your business that we all own is not only increasing, which is going to increase LeBron's max cap, but it's increasing dramatically if they can get a piece. And what's fascinating is the United States is one of the few Western countries where sports wagering is illegal, other than horse racing and in Las Vegas. But we are the largest sports wagering society in the world per capita. Americans wager on sports more than any other society in the world, including China, United Kingdom, what have you, on both a per capita basis and on a gross basis. So we are a nation infatuated with gambling, but it's all occurring still in brown paper bags illegally, which is, it just makes no sense.
Now let's flip the equation for a minute. You're Jeffrey Moorad, you're a sports owner, okay? And the salary cap in basketball is going to go from about $53 million 2 years ago to $110 in 2 years. You're going to double your payroll. Now, if you're in New York, LA, Chicago, Miami, it's great. If you're in a small market like Milwaukee, Charlotte, Utah, you're thinking, gosh, where does the money come from for me to pay an extra $60 million a year in salaries, which I have to pay? I have no choice. And so if you're an owner, I think this is almost like a nirvana, that you have a new revenue stream. People have been questioning for years, how high can the rights fees go in television? How much more money can the leagues milk out of? I mean, when the ESPN's got to pay Andrew's salary, which keeps going up, people wonder how much more, how much higher.
Couch cushion money there.
How much higher can the rights fees go? So I think from both players and owners and the league, they want to get their hands around the gambling issue. It's not a moral issue, as he's explaining. It's strictly a business issue. But I think the biggest impediment is how to control any potential slip on the integrity of the game.
And there's been a bit of creep on the issue over time. I mean, for example, when I ran the Diamondbacks in Arizona, we had to go to Major League Baseball at one point and ask them permission to sign up Gila River and ultimately Salt River casinos, who play prominent roles. The Attorney General from Arizona is going to be on the next panel, so we'll be able to hear his perspective on those kinds of issues. But, we went to Major League Baseball and asked for permission to have those companies sponsor us. And today, I'm going to guess, at least in the West, as well as other teams around the country, some of the Indian tribes are paying some of the largest sponsorship deals of any that teams have. Significant income. So, again, one of the questions was, well, wait a minute, do they have sports betting? Like, what are we going to do? Is that appropriate? So, look, like anything, I think change takes time. It evolves, and I think that's what's happening in this industry. But let's turn the discussion a bit here to the business side of daily fantasy, which is, obviously the focus of this morning. What your perspectives on, David, you invest in a lot of technology companies. Mike has started them, run them, now buys them. How does an investor, look at, kind of the current state of daily fantasy? How should they? What are the kinds of things that you'd be thinking if you were an investor? Understanding that neither of you are.
Yeah, I mean, today, I'd be thinking about how to protect my downside, frankly. I don't know if it's been reported, but there's certainly rumors in the industry that both FanDuel and DraftKings have raised additional capital recently from current investors. I'm not sure what investors participated and which didn't. You have some of the biggest and best investors in the world involved in these companies, from KKR to, I believe Silver Lake's invested in one of them. News Corp's invested, Comcast, NBC Universal's invested.
Presumably new investment at lower valuations?
Presumably a lower valuation with terms that probably protect downside even more in terms of preferences and what have you. There's also been a lot of speculation publicly that the companies will ultimately merge, which to me as an outsider makes total sense, right? I mean, right now they're competing with each other in terms of customer acquisition, marketing, what have you. So that's kind of, I think, the state of the state from a business perspective today. Obviously, the regulatory issue has been well covered. There's no reason for me to go into that, but that's going to be a big determinant factor in where these businesses go. The more kind of, I'd say, mundane analysis of the business opportunity that I think is worth pointing out and considering is, one, I think daily fantasy is much, much smaller business than people realize. Meaning it's a much smaller business relative to the press attention, the marketing dollars, and all the regulatory oversight that's going into it. You're talking about single-digit millions of Americans who are playing. Of those, even only a fraction of them are playing regularly. And of those, I think it's something like 2 to 5% win 90% of the money. So, you only have a few people who sit in their basements and have algorithms, and they're winning all the money, right? They're the smart money. All the rest of the people playing daily fantasy are throwing darts and have no chance. Now, increasingly, these companies are trying to create environments where people are playing against their friends. So it's dumb money playing against dumb money. And maybe your chances will increase because you're not playing against the algorithm, guys. Have fun. I personally think the only investment hypothesis that makes any sense to support multi-billion-dollar valuations is that these companies are going to get such big brand awareness and have league relationships and union relationships that when and if sports gambling gets regulated, they become the consumer brands to be all of a sudden become the Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Walmart in terms of the consumer brands of the sports bookies. Other than that, I don't think that these businesses will ever get to the point where they justify multi-billion-dollar valuations based on the size of the market, the complexity of the consumer experience, and the attrition and churn that those businesses have with people all losing to smart money.
Let me ask.
I'd like to offer a slightly different perspective. Let's take out the layer of gambling. I think that 10 years from now, millennials will go to a football arena, a basketball arena, a baseball stadium, and they're going to watch two teams play. And while they're watching them play, probably in their seats, the back of their seats will be an iPad or some kind of a digital. And these kids will say, I don't really want to watch the Giants play the Dodgers. I want to make up my own team. They're going to take guys, and while the game's going on, I think that the fan experience, I think that impact of fantasy, the digital fantasy experience will change the way stadiums are built, the way fans watch the games. over the next 5 to 10 years, independent of the gambling part. I think it's going to just totally just as smartphones and iPhones changed the way we experience books, movies, over the last 10 years. And I think
Along with virtual reality.
absolutely. And Peter Gruber, who owns a piece of the Golden State Warriors and the Dodgers and the football team in LA, is a pioneer with his virtual reality company, one of the smartest people.
Football is in soccer.
Exactly. One of the smartest guys I've ever met, certainly in the sports world. He used to run Sony Pictures. And so I think the whole fan experience is going to change because of the fantasy thing. And I agree, it's only a matter of time before they merge. But it's interesting to me when you mentioned the comparison with Coca-Cola. It's exactly what I feel. I wanted to say this to one of the earlier panels. One of the things that intrigues me, having been in this business a long time, is that you hear players talk about their brands today. I don't think there are probably 10 players in most leagues that really have a brand. And they talk more about their brand than they do about winning. But I think something like FanDuel and DraftKings overnight have become brands. The amount of attention they've drawn is incredible. And maybe they won't become Coca-Cola, but it's become part of our everyday experience, just like Google or Apple has become part of our experience.
So assume for a moment that sports gambling is legalized across the board. Are there companies, are there investors that are preparing for that? In other words, the ancillary companies that some of which you're involved with, Mike, at Chernin, that support the sports industry. Some obviously have the ability to cross over into gambling, whether it's fantasy sports or whether it's pure legalized gambling on sports. What type of marketplace do you think is being created for some of those ancillary businesses?
Well, the company you mentioned that went under, I guess, has the competitor Fantex, which is the guy Buck. I can't remember.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Buck French.
Fantex.
Yeah, and they created an entire stock market where you could buy LeBron James, and for a certain valuation. I think you're going to have a lot of it's going to get so sophisticated that people are trying to create like an off the court, off the field world, of sports, which is why it's fantasy, where you can combine your own teams, you could change coaches, you could change general managers. And I think it's going to get extremely complex because of the sophistication of digital, and as the devices become quicker, with Moore's law changing this thing as fast as we could talk about it, I think you'd have a whole peripheral industry of people making products that will change the entire way we experience sports.
Mike?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, David. I think that we are investing and looking at business opportunities today from a Chernin Group perspective that are not daily fantasy transaction businesses, which I'll describe FanDuel and DraftKings as, and certainly not interested in getting involved at all at any level with transactional sports betting. However, there are, we think, really interesting media information and data analytics businesses to be investing and building and acquiring today in both potential anticipation of sports gambling getting regulated, but frankly, even without sports gambling getting legalized and regulated, we think today that there's an underserved media information business targeting people who wager on sports, considering what I said earlier, that America is the #1 sports wagering society in the world, yet you tune on ESPN, CBS, NBC, Fox, who are the primary rights holders, broadcasters of sports media, and they don't talk about sports betting because of their complex relationship primarily with the NFL. Now that's starting to change. My co-founder from ProTrade's a sports gambling analyst on ESPN named Jeff Ma. He's the MIT card counting guy. Scott Van Pelt on the Scott Van Pelt Show has recently added a segment of bad beats, right, where you have the over-under. It's 45 points in the NFL, and it's a 42-0 game, and the team decides to kick a field goal with 1 second left for no reason. All of a sudden, you hit your over. I mean, I think entire media companies can be built looking at sports games through the lens of the over-under before the game, during the game, and after the game, targeting those fans. David?
Isn't that the danger? If in Super Bowl 25, instead of the cover, Sports Illustrated being Everson Walls with his finger up, the headline is Giants failed to cover the spread. That's the danger, right?
Well, I don't know that. What's dangerous about that? Because that's already happening. The Super Bowl is the most wagered on sports event, right?
But you still write about the game instead of the gambling.
But there's always going to be a massive percent of society that's not going to be wagering on sports, and they're going to be very interested in the game. My only point is that there's also a lot of people who are looking at the game through the lens of the wager, and they're being underserved from a media and information perspective. But do you think that the integrity of the Premier League matches are challenged because there's sports betting shops on every corner in the United Kingdom? I mean, it's a big deal, right? I mean, Manchester United plays Liverpool. The cover of, the Daily Mail or the Telegraph, whatever, is not, they failed to get 3 goals, therefore a lot of people lost on the over. It's, oh my gosh, that was an amazing match and it was 1-0, but betting is pervasive, it's accepted in society, it's part of pop culture, and people who bet can bet without worrying about the integrity because it's regulated, it's measured, and people who want to consume media through the lens of it can do that if they choose.
And by the way, in the UK and in other places outside the US, the betting goes to a level that is hard to even comprehend from a US perspective. For example, you go to a soccer match in the UK, and you walk into a box, they hand you literally a menu of bets that you can make. You can bet on when the first goal scored. You can bet on the first penalty kick. You can bet on every element of the match you're about to watch. So that winning and losing points and spreads are one thing, but the betting goes to a level that's really unbelievable.
Well, and the NFL plays now at Wembley Stadium 3 times a year, and the NFL has this mantra of integrity against gambling, but there's betting parlors at Wembley where they play their game once a year, as Jeff said. I think we're at this moment of time in sports where we hear this word so often, integrity, gambling bad, yet we have the NBA investing in FanDuel, yet we have 2 NFL owners investing in DraftKings, MLB with DraftKings. So I guess from an investment point of view, did these early investors, you mentioned KKR, these big-time investors, did they not see the heat coming with legislators, with lawsuits, with litigations coming, as we heard so often? I
think that, I don't know, obviously I can't speak for them, but my assumption is that they made a calculated risk. It certainly, I can say while at Yahoo, we certainly made a very conscious, deliberate discussion. We did investigation and research into the regulatory environment, the game of skill, the Kyle bill, and we made the determination that, in our opinion, it was a game of skill. We excluded certain states, which were very clear at the time we launched it. And, we're obviously they are certainly following the environment, and I think have recently shut down New York, as of others. So I think it was a calculated risk.
It sounds to me, from listening to the 2 of you, that FanDuel and DraftKings are really but a catalyst of change, and a catalyst that is forcing the broader issue of sports gambling to the forefront. And I think as we listen to our regulatory panel next, we're going to pick up, some more of those themes. But to me, that's really what I'm hearing this morning throughout these discussions.
Well, let me say personally, I am extremely sensitive about gambling. My father was a compulsive gambler, lost every penny he ever earned at the racetrack. And I think it's a little bit like the O'Bannon discussion we just saw on Skype. I mean, for me, I'm a little bit of a traditionalist. While I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for EA to be using Ed O'Bannon's image without permission, the fact that It costs $73,000 a year to go to NYU. So if you play sports at NYU for 4 years, that's $300,000. What if you said to the Ed O'Bannons, okay, we'll pay you for your likeness. You're not LeBron James. You're not Michael Jordan. You're not Kobe Bryant. Maybe it's worth $20,000 over 4 years, and you could pay for the right to go to UCLA and try out for a professional career. I don't think it's a very emotional issue. It's a very complex issue, and gambling is very, very emotional. I think from a pure business side, just the sheer volume of the dollars involved is going to force it to be legalized in a matter of time. Whether it's federally or state by state, New York State is not going to lose the revenue inherent in sports gambling at some point in time. And we're going to have to all come to grips with it. I think there's a whole layer in the investment side, in my opinion, in fantasy sports external to gambling. I think it's going to totally change. It's like 3D television or HD television, you know, digital versus analog, the revolution going on in digital advertising. Everything is changing. The whole way we view content is changing. And I think the fantasy experience, there are a lot of people who aren't sports fans, geeks that are going to love fantasy sports that don't really follow real sports at all. They're going to make up their own teams, their own coaches. They're going to have avatars in the game. They're going to have characters that aren't men or women playing in the games. And I think it's going to be like going to the movies in a way. It's going to be like a whole different entertainment experience. So I think you have two totally different sides of the fantasy issue. You have the gambling side, which I think is the economics at the end of the day are too great for us to ignore it. It will become a part of our everyday society. But I think there's a whole other layer where really smart people will create the next level of virtual reality, 3D, might be 5D, I don't know what it's going to be. And you're going to go to watch a game, and it's just going to be, I mean, if you ask me, and I'm 65 years old, when I go to watch the Wizards, I sit on the floor, and all during the game, I got my smartphone out. I want to see how my clients are doing, how the stats are. Sometimes I turn on, you know, NBA Live and watch the games while I'm at the game. If you would have told me I was going to do that 25 years ago, I would have said, yeah, when I come out of crack rehab. Never going to happen. I think the fantasy sports world is going to completely change not only the experience of the fans, it's going to change the way architects design stadiums. It's going to change the way you order food. It's going to change the entire...
Already has. Yeah. Already has.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that, you know, what we define as fantasy sports, which started as rotisserie baseball, then evolved to a spreadsheet, then evolved to a website, now has evolved to daily, and you know, I think it's going to evolve to be much more like an EA video game, and the definition of fantasy sports is going to continue to evolve, and it's certainly an enhancement towards interactivity, engagement. The beneficiaries will ultimately end up being sponsors, leagues, and team owners, because it's just going to drive more interactivity, more engagement, more attention, more interest, which fundamentally is the primary benefit of fantasy sports, right? It drives tune-in, it drives people watching the game. I think, you know, it being a catalyst towards sports gambling is an unknown, right? I mean, it could end up backfiring, right? All of this regulatory environment, New York could come out even stronger against daily fantasy, which closes the door even more firmly on sports gambling regulatory environment opening up. And it could be, you know, we could come back up here in another 10 years and talk about how hypocritical, in my opinion, that still is, given that it's largely shut down for moral reasons, but yet, I don't know how many people have seen the movie The Big Short. I mean, what's going on in the commodities markets and the trading markets, I think, is far more immoral, far more speculative, with all of our 401k and incomes being jeopardized by people who are essentially just gambling, yet gambling on an individual sporting event somehow is morally against the fabric of the United States. It literally goes back to puritanical, you know, anti-mob laws that are just antiquated at this point relative to the rest of Western society. And I agree with you, David. I think if it goes too far, you know, you don't want kids gambling. You don't want to enhance gambling. You want to stop problem gambling. And I think regulating it is actually a very meaningful step towards stopping regulated gambling, because right now there's no checks and balances in place with the illegal bookmaking happening. and problem gamblers are not being looked after through any regulatory or statutory means. So I think that's a strong argument for regulating as well.
Plus, New York did invent OTB, right?
What's that?
Did New York invent off-track betting? First state in America to be able to bet without going to the track. So, you know, again, without
ironically,
being too cynical, and I love the
I'm
Big
very
Short.
cynical. The biggest anti-sports betting legislative forces have historically been Las Vegas casinos, because they want to protect their monopoly on legalized sports betting, and increasingly it's the Indian casinos, because they want to make sure that if you need to get your fix, you can drive. I assume, I've never been here before, I assume within 30 miles we could get in a car and go make a bet on blackjack at a sports casino or at an Indian casino, but we can't make a bet on the Sixers.
Well, the other thing, as a litmus test, if you want to, you know, I think for many years, the NBA said they would never be a franchise in Las Vegas because of the gambling. I think today it's the opposite. I think Las Vegas may be the safest place to put a franchise because the gambling is so regulated there more than any other state. And there's going to be a franchise in Las Vegas. It's just a matter of time. I think the hysteria over the gambling has sort of flipped when the league becomes partners in FanDuel. Pretty hard to say you're worried about having a franchise in the gambling capital of the world. So it's a very interesting time, and it's obviously the issue of gambling is so emotional, just like the whole issue of whether to pay players in college. It's a very emotional issue. It's almost like abortion in politics. I mean, it's a lightning rod for people to express their emotions, but at the end of the day, the sheer preponderance of the money is too great. It's going to have to be regulated.
And the leagues know what an incredible fan engagement tool it is. I mean, as we talked about, what's a fan in Florida going to pay attention to a Utah Jazz game but for having a player on their team?
Well, thank you both. Terrific insights, and I think we're finally back on time here. So I want to thank David and Mike both for their participation, their perspectives, and I also want to go a little out of bounds here, only because I didn't have time to ask the question on the earlier panel. Mike, if you'll excuse me, I want to know one thing from David Falk, and that is, tell us about the most successful endorsement deal in the history of sports. I know it doesn't have anything to do with fantasy sports, but there's a little fantasy to creating Michael Jordan's Nike relationship. And I'd like to just have you talk about it for a few minutes, because I didn't have a chance to ask earlier.
Sure, that's a fun thing to talk about. So I started in this business in 1974 when I was in law school. In 1976, I went to Portland, Oregon, when Nike was a fledgling company, to watch my rookie client, Wally Walker, beat Philadelphia in the finals. The next day, the head of marketing for Nike and I, Rob Strasser, in the midst of this hysteria in Portland and parades going on, negotiated deals for that year we had the first, fifth, and sixth pick in the draft. I think the highest guy got $1,500 and $2,500 for 2 years, which was considered a really big deal at the time. By 1982, we had the number one pick in the draft, which was James Worthy. He was the highest paid player in the history of the NBA for a shoe deal with New Balance, on the same team with Kareem and Magic, ironically, making $150,000 a year. So Michael came along in '84. He was the star of the Olympic team, which played in Los Angeles, dominated the Olympics. And nobody really thought he was going to be a great player, but they thought he'd be really exciting, sort of like a Dominique Wilkins kind of a player. And so I went to all the companies. I said to them, we're not going to make any offers for Jordan. We will invite you to make an offer, but you have to explain to us what will you do to market him. And at the time, Converse was the official shoe of the NBA and the Olympics, ironically. Adidas was an enormous company. We represented the owner of Adidas, Horst Dassler, who was the son of the founder.
And Adidas had been the North Carolina brand.
No, Converse. And despite what you may have seen on these videos with Sonny Vaccaro and my good friend George Raveling, who each take 100% credit for bringing Jordan to Nike, after recruiting him for an entire year, Jordan did not want to get on the plane and even go visit Nike. He wanted us to sign with Adidas. So I love what Sonny tells me how influential he was. I would say that I have a vivid recollection of Sonny's role when Michael finally did get on the plane. He opened the door when the plane landed on the tarmac and said to Mrs. Jordan, "Welcome to Portland." And that was the last thing he said the entire day. Now, if that closed the deal, Sonny's way more influential than I give him credit for. And so what I wanted for Michael, having in the early part of my career worked for a firm that represented mostly tennis players, a lot of the great ones, Arthur Ashe, Stan Smith, Jimmy Connors, Tracy Austin, Yvonne Lendl. In golf and tennis, everyone has their own lines. Jordan Spieth has his own line. McIlroy's got his own line. Shoes, clothes, tennis rackets, golf clubs, balls. It's normal. In basketball, the only guy that ever had that was Ralph Sampson the year before Michael with Puma, and it didn't work. So we told all the companies that if you want to sign Jordan, you have to create a line for him. And because Nike at the time was probably a $30 million company, it's now $85 billion. Brand Jordan alone is a $3 billion company today. Rob was sort of willing to do it. And he came to my office in Washington in August. It was hot as hell on a Saturday. The air conditioning was off in the building. And he said, "Okay, we're willing to do the line. What do you want to call it?" I looked at him like he was nuts. I said, "What do I want to call it?" "This is called an autograph line, a signature line. We want to call it Michael Jordan." And he goes, "No, can't call it Michael Jordan." He said, America is fed up with designers slapping labels on products, whether it's sunglasses, beach chairs, cars, that trend is gone. You can't call it Michael Jordan. I said, "Okay, smarty pants, what do you want to call it?" I said, "That's your challenge." He goes, "We'll come up with a line, you come up with a name, but it can't be Michael Jordan." I wanted to rip his throat out. So I'm sitting in my office thinking, and Nike had just come out with a new line of track shoes, running shoes, that had this allegedly revolutionary technology called air soles that cushion your feet. So I thought for about literally a minute, just got this idea popped into my mind. I said, "Okay, I got it. We're going to call it Air Jordan." Air for the duality of the combination of the cushioning in the shoes and the fact that Michael played in the air. So they agreed to make the deal. To put it in perspective, it was a 5-year deal. And Rob came back to me and said, "Look, we're going to do this, but what happens if Michael's not as good as everyone hopes he's going to be? We'll keep the deal for 5 years, but we want to stop having to make the shoe if he doesn't really become a star." I said, "Okay, I'm cool with that. I don't think that's a big risk." So he said, "Okay, if he doesn't become the Rookie of the Year, or if he doesn't average 20 points at any time in the first 3 years, or if he doesn't become an all-star any time in the first 3 years, we want to have the right to stop making the shoe at the end of the 3rd year of the contract." Okay, I said, "No problem, but let me ask you a question. Hypothetically, suppose none of that happens, but you're really selling a ton of shoes. What do you care what he's done if it's working?" He said, "Okay, that's a good point." I said, "How many shoes would you expect to sell at the end of the 3rd year?" Now, you have to understand, no one had this. Dr. J didn't have it, Magic Johnson didn't have it, Larry Bird didn't have it, Kareem didn't have it. And Nike wasn't a very big company, so they did some checking. So, okay, if he does none of the performance categories, doesn't become Rookie of the Year, whatever, but he sells $3 million worth of Jordans by the end of the 3rd year, we'll keep the deal going. At the end of year 1, we sold $130 million. He outsold every other shoe company in the United States. And the thing that I'm the most proud of is that I used to tease Michael when he was very young, because he is the ultimate needler. He teases you 24 hours a day. And I said, I told him 2 things. I said, my dream is that he was 21 years old, that one day you'll meet a woman, you get married, you'll have kids, and if one of them is a boy, could you imagine if he could walk into Foot Locker 30 years from now and order a pair of Jordans? How cool would that be? The other thing I told him, which has happened, he has 2 sons, Marcus and Jeffrey, both played college basketball. They played together for a year at Central Florida. The other thing I used to tease him was, those of you who know Converse basketball shoes, historically, there's a brand called Chuck Taylor's. No one knows who Chuck Taylor is, but his name is on the shoe. And I used to tell Michael, it's going to come a time, big time, when a kid buys your shoe and said, God, you kidding me? Michael Jordan played basketball? I thought he was the guy who designed the shoe. How we're getting a little, he's 53 years old now, we're getting a little close to that time. So it's been a wonderful experience. The brand is amazing. I think it'll be a $10 billion brand by 2020. It's killing it in China. Michael Jordan today sells more shoes than if you took every player in the NBA who's got his own shoe. LeBron, Kobe, Dwayne Wade, Chris Paul, Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, added them all together, multiplied by 3. Jordan sells more than them all combined, by far. And so it's probably the best. As a footnote, I would tell you that while I say it was probably the best deal I ever made in my career, it's also probably the worst deal I ever made in my career, because not knowing how successful it could be, when you're making a deal like this, a licensing deal, you have guaranteed money and you have royalty compensation. And the deal was for $1.4 billion a year for 5 years and a very small royalty. I think you got like 15 cents a shoe. If I had known how many shoes they would have sold, I would have signed them for $1 a year and gone 50-50. Now, as a final epilogue to the story, about 4 or 5 years go by, and we want to make a deal for Michael with the NBA to do videos. The NBA had a deal with CBS Fox to produce videos, sort of like music videos. And the 2 most successful ones they had produced were Magic Johnson and Kareem. So the current hockey commissioner, Gary Bettman, was in charge of all NBA licensing at the time. So I went to him and I said, I want to make it like an old-fashioned Hollywood deal. I want to do 3 videos, and I want you to pay Michael $600,000 guaranteed against a 15% royalty. And Bettman said, do you always have to be such a blank? I said, how am I being a blank? He said, do you know how many videos we would have to sell to cover a $600,000 guarantee? I said, I have no idea. He said, 200,000 units. I said, well, is that a lot? He said, it's a lot. Magic has the highest video in the history of the NBA. He sold 50,000 units. Kareem is number 2 at 35,000 units. And you're asking me to cover you for 200,000 units. So we went back and forth. We ended up making the deal I should have made with Nike. We cut the guarantee from 600 to 300, and we went 50-50. How many units did he sell? Anyone, just pick a number. You're close. He sold 2 million. 2 million. So after I made that deal, I realized I'd really screwed up the Nike deal. And so we actually raised the royalties for the rest of the time. And today, it wouldn't matter if Nike paid Michael $1 billion a year, $10 billion a year, $50 million a guarantee. He's making over $100 million a year in sales because the company's at $3 billion. And it's a tribute to his enduring popularity and how much he's loved around the world.
Well, thank you, David.